There's
So the
somebody I
other
want to make a
day,
shout
I'm
out
on
to.
the subway and I'm heading to Brooklyn when I overhear a couple of nursing students talking. And they're talking about their recent exam and they're laughing. And I, of course, introduce myself and I talk to them about this awesome podcast and how we're doing an episode on RT and RN relationships and how they should catch the episode and join the discussion and, oh, follow us on TikTok. And one of the RNs, she looks over at me and goes, "What could you guys be talking about? RT doesn't do anything." And I was so taken aback that a student would say that because the student is likely hearing that from a more senior RN or perhaps doesn't really understand what RT does and how much of a problem that is. That's what we're going to dive into today. RT and RN relationships. Why is there tension and what can you do to break silos and foster a positive workplace environment? Maybe even friendship. We have Cathy, Brenner, and Sue McDonald here with us today. This is RT Sidebar. Stay tuned.
Hello, everyone. Exciting episode of RT Sidebar. Jonathan's going to make fun of me because I use my hands to talk, but I'm going to do it anyway. As always, my co-host, JB, Jonathan Butler, California, moving to Tennessee this week. So good luck to you, my friend. And as always, our producer, the herder of cats, Anna Hayes. Always a pleasure having both of you guys here. Today is an exciting RT Sidebar. I'm so excited to introduce my two amazing clinicians, leaders, but more than anything, my friends. Miss Catherine. I can call her Catherine because she calls me Matthew. Her and my mother are the only ones that call me Matthew. So Miss Catherine Brenner is an amazingly talented respiratory therapist and clinical educator, and a proud Golden Ram, by the way. Hashtag Josh Good, that was for you. They were an Apex Award winner, by the way. So congratulations to them. She's also an old school barfly. She's been every single episode. So Cathy, as always, for your support, we appreciate it. We also have another great friend of ours, Sue McDonald, clinical nurse specialist. Every single letter behind her name, every single one. She's an alphabet of things behind her name. She is great. Congrats on finishing school and another few letters afterwards. So Cathy, Sue, welcome to RT Sidebar. We're so excited to have you. So I first want to start with this, okay? This is a disclaimer that I'm saying, and Jonathan's laughing at me because he was laughing at me during this conversation. Everyone has a COVID story, every single person, okay? And Cathy and Sue are a huge part of mine. They're amazing clinicians and two of my dearest friends. And during our pre-interview, it was pretty emotional. You know, we talked about relationships, we talked about bullying, we talked about friendship, we talked about eating our young, which I think we all know a little bit about that. It was emotional. Hospital care is tough. And this is going to be a tough episode, I think. But more than anything, this is not an RT versus RN podcast. This is an RT plus RN podcast. So this might get raw, but we think it's worth the ride. So Cathy, Sue, my dear friends, I'll try to keep the tears as low as possible, but thank you guys for being here. Let's jump in. RTs and RNs don't always get along. We want them to be a match made in heaven, but they're not. Why? Why is it common that RTs and RNs butt heads like this so often? Kath, let's start with you.
Oh, I think it goes back a long way. You know, everybody has their turf wars, and I know more than you know, and you know more than the nurse knows more than the doctor does, or the RT knows more than the doctor does. So everybody it's like they come to a fight to figure out who knows the patient best. And instead of coming to the bedside and saying, hey, we're all here for one reason, we're here for the patient.
I think it's tough though sometimes, right? It's a lot. Who's in charge, who's not in charge, right? The nurse is the traffic cop of the hospital. That's what they are, right? So they have their own perspective. The respiratory therapist is very specific in what we do. We fix lungs, and the doctors kind of does a little bit of everything. But that RT-RN relationship does get hurt at times. Did it get hurt during COVID? And I
No,
know it didn't
I
get
don't
hurt
think it
during.
got hurt. I don't think so. I think that it got better because we all were literally thrown into this and had no other choice but to come together in a really, really hard time.
Yeah, that's
This is
true.
something that this is something I never want to go back to. I don't ever want to do a pandemic again, but we all had that in common. We all had, you know, the fear of the unknown. We all
Mhm.
knew that we had to come together for the patient. We all knew we had to figure out what this virus was, how to treat it, how to treat the patient, how to treat, we were in the hospital pretty much alone. You couldn't have visitors, you couldn't have anybody else there. So we only had each other. So I feel like we did come together, because people literally were dying left and right. And, you know, family members on Zoom, we had to be the patient's family members sometimes and hold their hands and hold each other's hands and give each other a
Agreed.
hug.
Agreed. Um, Sue, I know we've been back and forth a little bit with sound. Have you ever seen adversarial relationships? Have you ever experienced adversarial relationships between RTs and RNs?
Well, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I started in intensive care, where I clearly learned much later that the relationship with RT and RN is very different at times in intensive care than maybe out on the floors, because you do have, like Cathy said, I felt like a lot of times at least in my practice, we had that hand in hand the whole time because my patients were really sick and they were on a vent. And I discovered later during COVID, when these patients were going in a lot of other places, that I either was blessed or naive. I don't know. My relationships were good. And maybe I had my head in a bubble. But then as I changed roles and was in other areas and supporting, that's when I really started observing from the outside in.
Mhm.
And I could hear nurses. It was always like, well, respiratory this and respiratory that. And I paged them an hour ago and blah, 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 and then respiratory therapists being like, that nurse was really, bitchy, and I was trying to just work with her, and she seemed like she didn't even want me in the room. And that's when my eyes really started to pop open, because that was actually new to me.
Yeah, I don't think that this happens everywhere, but I think it's probably more common than not. JB, have you experienced this too?
I have a hard time believing it doesn't happen everywhere, because every hospital I've ever walked into has some kind of turf battle between some clinical department versus another one. And then I've even seen day shift versus night shift. It just seems like you get the clicks and then they want to circle up and fight everybody. I don't understand it sometimes. It's not anything that I wanted to be a part of. But yeah, I do see it, unfortunately, everywhere.
Yeah, so the turf war thing is interesting. So Sue, I see that you have something to talk about your thoughts on what Jonathan just said.
So, Jonathan, I agree with 100% that it happens everywhere. Every unit, he's right, shift to shift, just person to person. You think about the numbers, sheer volume of different people, different humans interacting. So when I say it was new to me, it was because I personally had my own just relationship with respiratory. And so I assumed everybody else did too. That's why I was either just young and naive or lucky, but I think it's more young and naive, because I feel like I just had that going on, and what's everybody else's problem? I don't get it. In fact, the respiratory therapist my first year out was working with making some vent changes in open heart ICU, and she said, hey, how many pressors are you on? And I'm like 5. I already have 2 chest tubes, 5 pressers, and a lot going on. And he said, yeah, I really wanted to increase the PEEP. Doesn't sound like I'm going to be able to. Me being a new nurse was like, why not? And one of my first experiences was a respiratory therapist teaching me about the effect of PEEP on blood pressure, because I was on all those pressors. But I've now seen in practice nurses be like, why are you asking me that? Like, what do you care how many pressors I'm on? You're the respiratory therapist. You come in, you do the vent, you suction, you listen, and you go. And I thought that was really, that was a powerful awakening.
So Shay, thank you for your comment over in the sidebar. That's what the chat is. That's the sidebar. Please use it. But Shay said she finds it more prevalent, that butting of heads outside of the emergency room. And Jeannie, who's a good friend of ours that we work with, also a emergency room nurse, says she really doesn't have that butting of heads. Do you think it's pockets? Cathy, I want to go to you. Do you think it's pockets? Do you think it's worse one areas than others? Like, or do you think it's just a different experience in a different place?
I think it kind of all depends. I always had better relationships in the intensive care unit because I was there more. I was more seen. I had to be there because I had critical patients. Med surge, I was in and out. I'd give a treatment. I didn't know, and I still kind of don't know the med surge nurses as well as I know the intensive care unit nurses or the ER nurses, because you are there in the thick of a very stressful moment, and you get to know these nurses very well because you are in and out with them very frequently. So I do think that med surge is a little different, that you don't know them quite as well as you do the ICU nurse.
So I think that's interesting because I've seen it both ways myself. But Jeff just put it in the sidebar. It definitely depends on the culture. And, discussing this with my wife, who's also a respiratory therapist, she said, well, you're a leadership podcast. Sometimes leadership drives a bad culture and the proverbial shit rolls downhill. So if we don't have a good culture as leaders, that permeates into our staff. Do you guys think that is correct, incorrect? Sue, what do you think?
I think that has a lot to do with it. And that's, part of the reason why I'm very grateful for the experience we went through, because I understand a little bit better that way, and hope that as sort of in a leadership role as a clinical nurse specialist, that I can, from the ground up, start leading by example with positive relationships, not just with respiratory, but with basically all our disciplines that work with us throughout the hospital.
Excellent. Kath, anything else you think?
Oh, I like to make friends with my nurse because at the bedside, because why make a stressful situation more stressful? Do you know what I mean? Like, if you guys can joke and get along and carry on, like a lot of the ICU nurses that I work with, I know, personally, like I know they have kids or husbands or dogs or whatever. And, it makes for a less, you walk through the intensive care unit or the ED and be like, oh, hey, how was your trip to Hawaii or whatever? Because it breaks the monotony and it breaks the stressfulness that you're working in. And it makes people real, and it makes people appreciate each other a little bit more, like when I was pregnant with my daughter, everyone's like, oh, what do you do? What are you having? And a lot of the old ICU nurses, to this day are like, oh, how's your kid doing? And you build that friendship, and instead of walking in the room, and I don't know, my mom always taught me to be nice to people. So, the golden rule, do unto others as you'd have done to you.
Perfect. JB, you and I were talking in Chicago this week. Nobody comes to work and goes, hey, I want to do a crappy job today. I also don't think anybody comes to work and goes, hey, I want to fight with somebody today. Do you agree? Like, I don't think anybody on this call goes, I can't wait to ruin RT's life, or I can't wait to ruin nursing's life. JB, what do you think about that?
Well, and I was just thinking of a question when we were talking, and the environments where the good relationships are occurring. It's going to be in the intensive care areas like the ICU, the ED, NICU, PICU, right? So the RTs are usually stationed in those areas and cannot leave. So they're really forced to build relationships with the people that they're working with. Where if you were on a med surg floor and my only interaction was with this nurse was the 15 minutes it took me to give her a breathing treatment, and I'm off to another floor to see someone else. Do you think that the time with the other clinical professional helps build that relationship?
Mm. That's an interesting thought. And I know I want to go on to the next point, but that's an interesting thought because Josh said the same thing about ICU and ED. Respiratory therapists spend more time there. So you get to build relationships like Cathy talked about and talking about your kids and your dogs. I think that goes a long way. But what I want to go into next, which I think is, to me, it's personal. Okay. So, Cathy, you came into my life 5 years ago. So we knew each other pre-COVID, but Sue, I really didn't know you pre-COVID. And you guys are part of my COVID journey. So I want you to think about 2020, March through May of 2020. It's COVID. It sucks. What were you thinking back then in 2020? Sue, let's start with you.
At first, well, I appreciate you asking that question because I remember thinking a lot of things and nothing at the same time as I drove to work every day, tracking the virus, traveling, opening units. I was nervous, I was actually nervous from the get-go about respiratory and nursing working together. How was this going to play out on the non-critical care floors? Because I was reading in all the other states, all the overflow, and you could kind of see the tsunami coming and just wondering who was going to pop up in the life jacket with you and who was going to step on you to get out of the way, kind of thing. I was concerned.
It was a scary time. And Kath, you were my clinical educator. And Josh Good's on the phone here today. My great friend Dana Stauffer is right down the road, was all there together, and we were all kind of crapping our pants a little bit. What were you thinking?
I was scared. I was absolutely terrified. Going in every day, Matt handing me this piece of plastic, the Vortran ventilator, and telling me I needed to figure out how to use it in case we needed it. And I literally had to put this thing on a test lung and figure it out all by myself, literally tears falling down my face because I had no idea what I was doing. But I also had two really great leaders who made sure that I was safe and that I could come home every night and know that my daughter wasn't going to get sick or send it to her dad or whatever. So that helped. That was very, very, very helpful.
Kath, I saw
But
you.
scary.
Oh, it was scary. I saw you get a smidge choked up, and this is when I get choked up on. And he will never admit it, and he's on this call right now. But Josh Good kept us safe. He kept us safe during COVID. He literally went to bat, so we had N95s our whole time. So Josh Good, thank you for keeping us safe. Sue,
Amen.
Amen. Right?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, if it's okay, that
Please.
it kind of comes to mind that I was just thinking about who are all these people and are going to work together. I had imposter syndrome. People are calling me day and night for information, and I'm like, am I really this person? And I didn't know you guys yet either, really. But early on, it was very clear that respiratory therapy was being taken very well care of by their leader. You never saw a respiratory therapist without a 95 period. And I don't mean one that they held on to for a week. But nurses, on the other hand, had a whole they were terrified, just like Cathy and I, of being told different things about PPE every day. And they have this mixture of patients, and people are telling us to put them in paper bags and use them for a week and then send them off somewhere, and they magically come back. And then the next day I don't know, it was all over the place. And nurses, I think at that time, felt really, really vulnerable in general. And it's almost like schoolyard. I don't think anybody would go, I'm jealous of RT. I think people just wished that they were in that they were, I guess, safe also from their leaders. So
Yeah.
then that was a lot of damage control in some ways. You know, well, why is respiratory doing this and nursing's not doing that? And they're all asking me these questions. And I was like, oh my God, I don't know.
So you bring up a
Because
great point.
90% of what a respiratory therapist did was considered dangerous amount on the do not do list.
Everything, right? But like they didn't, like, even when they would go in and do those things though, like there was like, oh, you in the beginning when people wanted to wear an N95 in non-COVID rooms that didn't have aerosolization, as you know, nationwide there were shortages. So you weren't to wear an N95 in those rooms, which I feel comfortable with now. But in the beginning, when we didn't know anything, there was nothing comfortable about that. And seeing one group every time doing the N95 and another group not was just one tiny dot on just this big wheel that accumulated a lot of tiny dots.
Wow. I remember when we first started having conversations about COVID, the misinformation, it wasn't misinformation, it was the lack of information. So getting any type of consensus was scary. There is a policy that Cathy, Josh, and I, and Sue worked on that probably has 25 revisions because we were trying to do what's right. And then we were getting from the staff, do you even know what you're doing? Like they would be kind of angry about it. You're like, no, we're just doing whatever we like. New information comes all the time. So it was challenging. I also want you to think about, and Cathy, I want you to think about this. You guys are both leaders. Was it different being a leader during this time of COVID than maybe it was for the frontline therapist or frontline nurse? Like, what were your concerns?
Oh yeah, I thought it was scarier because people were turning to me for an answer. Like, how do I use this piece of equipment? What do I do here? What do I do in this situation? What do I do in that situation? How do I do this? How do I do that? So I feel like it was scarier, but I mean, that was just my take on it. I just, people wanted to know. It was absolutely was a lot of responsibility, and it was a lot of sleepless nights. And again, trying to figure out how to use things that we never saw before, or everything we knew as a respiratory therapist, we learned in school literally went out the door. Use your N95 once and throw it in the garbage. Funny. Nope. Use your N95 for a week to 2 weeks and recycle it, reuse it. Yeah. Don't wear makeup. Don't do this. Don't have a life. Literally everything we learned in respiratory school was out the window. So it was very, very scary.
Sue, any other comments?
Yeah, I agree. It kind of went to that imposter syndrome. Like, I mean, I do know I could do it, but this was a pandemic. And you have people from all levels calling me, same like you, Cathy, right? Why don't we have this? This is da, 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 da. But I will say this, it was a whole lot less scarier once I decided one time not to call and to just march my butt over and figure out where the heck respiratory even lived in the hospital. And was like, hi, I'm Sue. I think I'm covering like every pandemic floor right now. And we had been previously introduced over something similar through Matt, but it was like, that was the start of like, okay, I'm not alone. I think it's going to get better.
Not alone is a big one. Okay. So when we talk about relationships, a lot of times a common enemy brings people together. I think, and I know the story, but Cathy and Sue, I want you guys to tell the story about the problems that we were having with COVID and why your relationship mattered the most. Like, what is your light bulb moment of, hey, we need to fix something or we are in big trouble? And to me, that was the Sue and Cathy show. So Kath, why don't you start? Tell us your thoughts about that light bulb moment of, oh my God, I can't do this alone.
Well, we had a critical care capacity of 88% or greater on a daily basis. We had patients in the ICU that potentially could be taken care of in med-surg areas. And we came together and we're like, hey, some of these patients that aren't intubated, that are potentially on less support than event, we could put them on med surge and we could manage them there. And that's where Sue and I came together. We had already started thinking about, in the end of 2019, we started thinking about how we were anticipating a crappy flu season. So we were talking about managing a lot of our, like, at the time, high flow nasal cannula patients in med surge. So that's how we initially came together. And then the pandemic hit and it changed from a crappy flu season to hello, COVID. And so we said, can we start? And that's when High Velocity came to our institution. And we decided, can we start managing these patients in med surge? So Sue and I came together and said, all right, well, let's figure out how to educate the nurses in med surge and how they can be comfortable with this, because they were scared to death of having something that normally was kept in an ICU to be now on a med surge floor. So as Josh coined it, the dog and pony show, Sue and I literally would take a high velocity unit with us round and round, and we literally
The one that I
talk to
hid in my
everybody.
office. I had one stashed. I had literally one stashed with all the pieces and everything in my office. And then I'd close the door at night and be like, hope nobody's looking flat.
So, Sue, Cathy comes to your office with Josh. I was even there a little bit. And they said, we're going to do something on your med surge floor that has never even been comprehended. And it's not about the piece of equipment or whatever we're using. You and a respiratory therapist nursing conversation about something that has never been done. What's your immediate thought with that? You're like, who is this Cathy and why is she saying that we can do this?
Well, my immediate thought was, thank God Matt tried to do something ahead of time for a flu season that never happened.
Mhm.
That was think one. He's credited to us, but that was think one. Think two for me, because I'm a critical care nurse who is supporting med surge, was like, all right, let's do this. Like, what is this about? But then I thought, oh boy, I'm excited. I'm an ICU nurse. There are going to be barriers, and we're going to have to figure out what they are for comfort level, for safety. A lot of things we're going to have to go down on the nursing side, to get the kind of true buy-in you need. Because, I just think that's normal, and I'm glad we anticipated it, and tried to get ahead of it, because we couldn't have just showed up and been like, here you go. Here's this patient on all this high flow. And I know the policy says never, ever, 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 ever do this anywhere but ICU, but have at it. And we were I was like, holy crap, how are we gonna get all this out and help them?
So I know what the dog and pony show is. I think that's an important piece when it comes to collaboration. So you're trying something new. It's something innovative. It's never been done before. It's going to be scary. Change is hard, and we're changing at rapid pace. Tell me what the dog and pony show was and why it was effective.
The dog and pony show was literally Sue and I going together with the machine in hand. The frontline team, the nurses, whoever would listen to us, really. We went to their huddles and whatever, and we talked to them about what we were doing, why we were doing it. And they saw a nurse and a respiratory therapist telling them the same story, that it was going to be okay, that they could help decompress ICU, that they could help keep their patients on the floors with them, and that it was 3 little buttons that they had, 3 settings that they had to keep the patient safe and to change. And that was it. And it wasn't as scary as it was. And Sue and I just did it together. And sometimes if Sue wasn't able to be there, I did it with just the nurses. And I think that was helpful for the nurses to see the therapist coming around and teaching them, not just another nurse telling them what to do. So they saw that Sue and I had this relationship, and they figured, all right, well, if they can do it together, I guess we all could do it together.
So what'd you think?
I thought it was cool that eventually my respiratory colleagues here felt like I knew enough about our high velocity and the system we were going to roll out from a respiratory aspect, like what you guys do with it and how it all works, that you let me do it by myself too. So if Cathy and I did have to divide and conquer, we could. And that also gave an opportunity to be like, hey, you know, I'm in servicing this. I'm a nurse. I know enough about this. And but it wasn't so much the machine they were worried about. Of, you know, once we did that, like Cathy said, it's like, this isn't scary. Then a whole nursing bag of worms just went for, okay, this has never been done. What's the policy? What are we allowed to do? What we can do? How often will they assess? How many patients can they take? What, and then like Cathy said, what if this, what if this, what if that, what if that? And when I was like, well, you're going to have someone to support you all the time. Respiratory, you know, is going to be there for you all the time. You remember what I remember so clearly was the people like this during the in-service, like, I really want to see it. And then the people that were like, oh, wow, that's great. And they had enough trust in either one of us, you know, but I think it took time for that to totally build. And then it built and then it exceeded expectations.
So,
and I think we also dedicated a couple of therapists to, you know, it started out on 2 wings that we implemented it on, and not one therapist was covering both of those wings. So they were able to see that a therapist, when it was called, would come to their bedside and help out when need be. So I think that was helpful too, that they were able to have that therapist kind of at their beck and call, if you will, as they got more comfortable with it.
Kath, that's how the staff feels. How did that make you feel?
I felt empowered. I felt like I was making a difference. I felt like I was helping to pave the way for the future in the hospital. I felt like I was valued. I felt like potentially things were gonna be okay.
Did it bring you any joy?
Yeah. Yeah. To show, I mean, it's not like it's not like we were paving the way with anything amazing. Like, it was just high velocity. But you know what I mean? Like, I still felt like, you know, coming to work and teaching somebody something new that potentially was going to help everybody. ICU, med surg, respiratory, the patient, bottom line.
Sue, how did it make you personally feel?
So I had so many different feeling buckets during that time. And then luckily, eventually my respiratory therapy bucket ended up being the most full, because I felt really happy that I got a warm reception from respiratory to help. You know, just all we were really doing is just bringing a higher, well, no, I shouldn't say all, actually it was huge, but we were bringing higher acuity patients to these other areas. It doesn't even matter. And to some extent, it could have been anything they were on, wouldn't matter, but they were sicker. And so it was great because I could kind of like talk to Cathy about that. I know this seems like a hot nasal cannula to you guys, but this is a patient who is sick enough to need this. And, you know, I think the one thing, you know, I learned so much about how respiratory therapies days go and their responsibilities. And I could then also help talk about that with the RNs. And I feel like they did of us too, because you know, it's like, hey, but I don't know if you know that, like, if they have this higher acuity patient, their assessments are every 4 hours, their vitals are more frequently. They need more staff to get people out of bed because they decompensate so rapidly. We're short staffed because 50% of our workforce is sick. In the very beginning, we only had certain staff even allowed to go in the rooms. So those were all the kinds of things I was thinking. I'm an ICU nurse. Sure, I know how many I'm going to get. But honestly, even in the ICU, if they suddenly sent me something that I never done before, I'd be terrified. And so it was nice that you guys, respiratory was really receptive when I was able to say, like, it's not just a machine, it's how sick they are. And now the level of care they have to provide with very likely fewer resources than they normally have. And so that I felt like made it even more important. I mean, we were both running around town, to support that. But I remember you guys being like, yeah, we kind of didn't, like, why would you know that? Like, and what our documentation looks like. You wouldn't necessarily know that, and that the burden that was going to add to the nurse's workflow, which then in my mind, it means what's going to happen quality wise and what's going to happen outcome wise, not because I have a bad nurse, but because I have a whole fleet of nurses doing sicker patients than normal with fewer resources and also terrified about the pandemic, just like Cathy and me, right? So that's
I
kind
think
of
we
that all
told that.
went. Yeah.
And we told that to our team. We said, we can run high velocity anywhere. We can run it in the ED. We could run it out in the street with a tank. Doesn't matter where we put it. We know how to work it. We let our team know these nurses are scared. They've never seen this. They've never done it. These are, potentially ICU patients. We need to give them grace. Just like, we need to make sure that we are coming to the bedside when they call, because they are not as familiar with it. They're not as, apt to, they have 5 other patients instead of just 2, or this, that, or the other thing. So we made sure we had that conversation with our team to say, hey, listen, you need to get to that bedside sooner than later. And if you can't, then you need to find somebody that can, because when they call for help, we need to get there.
You guys said 2 words that really meant something to me. First one is Cathy's, is grace. Grace goes a long way, and grace is about understanding somebody else and really understanding what they're going through, so you guys can work together. And I feel that one word alone is what can bring respiratory therapists and nurses together, is that word grace. But then the second word I want to talk about, and it's going to pique, it's definitely going to pique Jeannie and Jonathan's interest. So you said quality. When we collaborate, do we get better outcomes?
There's so much literature out there about the importance of interprofessional, interdisciplinary, however you frame it, collaboration to literally improve patients' outcomes, length of stay, untoward events, skin issues, whatever it is. So, I mean, that's the reason why I think a lot of people also don't know why we care about magnet. When you hear you're a magnet facility, and there's magnet facilities out there, it is, they look a lot at interdisciplinary collaboration and the trajectory of your outcomes. And typically that's nursing, is kind of like on that pile of things, but Cathy jumped in with 2 feet to help me make sure that we help the teams achieve that same quality. But under normal circumstances, interdisciplinary collaboration is the key to better outcomes, literally.
That is well said. Very well said. So I'm seeing good quality. I'm seeing collaboration. I'm seeing all these things, and everybody feels good. You're doing the very best you can for patient care. I saw Kaylee goes, well, if we have this type of collaboration, can we walk more patients in ICU? Yes, we could. Can we do different quality improvement projects? 100%. So Jonathan, when we think about our quality improvement, and I'm seeing Jeannie shaking her head, when we're thinking about quality improvement, isn't this the place to start?
Oh, absolutely, because you can't do any quality improvement with a patient without including everyone that's going to come into contact with the patient, and even those that are not going to come into contact with the patient, like non-clinical departments, like materials, right? I've seen quality improvement projects fall apart because nobody told materials to stock the supply needed on the shelf. And so it ran out and the quality improvement project fell apart. It's communication always needs to be at the top of every quality initiative. And then it's got to be quality communication. You have to understand everyone's role and have a respect for that role. Once you start thinking that some roles are more important than others, then it's like you're saying one leg of a tripod is not as important as the other two, and it's going to fall over. So you have to respect everyone's profession, everyone's input into the quality initiative, but it all starts with good communication. It really does.
I think about, I look back on my time because I don't work with Cathy and Sue anymore, but it's probably one of the proudest moments of my career. And I'll tell you why just briefly. We had more COVID patients than our big sister hospital that was twice our size. And these two, along with all the nurses and respiratory therapists and physicians, saved a lot of lives. And I look back on those days and I look back on my time with Cathy and Sue and Josh and all those great people. And it gives me a great sense of pride that's really in my heart, that just makes me feel so good. So I'm so happy that you guys came on, but I want to finish that off. Okay. This culture started at the top. It started about leaders working with leaders purposefully to get to a common goal, to get to the right thing. I believe in the critical care triad: respiratory therapist, nurse, and physician. I'm going to copyright that. Somebody wrote #copyright, probably me. I'm going to copyright that. But sustaining culture is harder. Sustaining cultures are much harder than changing it. Were you guys able to sustain that relationship? And what happened?
Well, no, it hasn't really sustained. We don't have, 49 high velocities up on med-surg to date. Thank goodness. That was an interesting day for sure. But it definitely didn't sustain. I'm not sure why. Probably because, turnover and things have changed, I believe. But I'd like to see it return, get back to that some way, somehow.
Sue, do you think the drain of what's happened in the last few years has made this tougher? People have a shorter fuse. People are burned out.
I do. I think there's, it's hard not to end up with your just little world around you when things have just been going on for such a long time. Cathy also mentioned turnover, so much turnover, right? And then then there's agency, travel nurses, travel respiratory therapists. I thought despite all that we sustained it throughout the pandemic, let's say. So there was someone in the chat, who was saying, yep, we agree those relationships are easier in med-surg and ICU. In ER and ICU, but in med-surg it's more difficult. So automatically I'm thinking, okay, well, there's our gap. So nothing would have happened if we weren't proactive at the time of the pandemic, right? So we are all very proactive in crisis. I firmly believe that. But for longer term sustainability, and it's just like whatever, or creating a culture, it's just not as easy to get all the stakeholders buy-in, or even just the first two. Somebody has to be the champion, the proactive person, the champion of the pieces you want to pull together.
Is it because we lost our common enemy, that the urgency has kind of gone away? Or is it we're just tired? We don't have enough time. We had an episode where I don't have the time to be nice, and Anna almost lost her mind. But are we
honestly, nurses feel that way about the care of their patients, honestly. Not that I make sure I make this clear. I don't mean that they don't care about their their patients. In fact, they care about them as much, if not more, after everything they've seen. I think the worry is, how can I take the care of the patients that I want to, now that we're back in this normal world, which we're acting like it's normal, but it's not all normal yet. We have massive
Yeah.
shortages and things like that. We still have higher acuity patients, you know. So yeah, I think the common enemy is gone, but all the little landmines are usually in those war zones for, you know, centuries to come. So it's easy to kind of let the adrenaline roll and go back to normal, but normal didn't work. So what can we do proactively to recruit champions of this kind of work?
JB, you just put something in the chat. You want to elaborate on that?
Oh, what I meant by that was, now that COVID has not gone away but subsided, and are we no longer spending the same amount of time together that we were when there was COVID, right? So you're having to partner with these patients and you're side by side, and now you're no longer side by side. Did the band break up because of that?
I think potentially, yeah, absolutely. Not only that, we have a lot more stressors back in the hospital. The visitors, you know, at the bedside were, you know, during COVID, it was almost serene sometimes, very quiet, very oddly peaceful, because you didn't have the families there that you had to tiptoe around. Like, you could go in and just do your job and, you know, come out and move on to the next patient, as opposed to having to maneuver around the families and everything like that. Not saying that families aren't very important to the care of the patients. I'm not saying that at all. Just that, you know, we have that extra stressor back.
The extra layer of care that you have to put in, that was actually was
Absolutely.
removed for a little bit. Cathy,
Yeah.
you talked about, you know, at the very beginning, your camaraderie with nursing was because you spent time together. Are you losing that time because you're going from patient to patient to patient to patient?
I don't necessarily think we're losing that time, but I don't know. I think people, all healthcare, not just respiratory, not just nursing, I think all healthcare professionals are tired. I mean, I know how tired I am. The last 3 years were war.
Mhm. I think about this a lot myself, is, you know, have we really healed? Because we went from horrible COVID to the aftermath of COVID. And right now, the aftermath of COVID actually feels a little worse. Like, it's just not ending. Sue, what do you think? And I know I struggle with it myself, that
I
it just
do.
doesn't feel like it let up.
No, I think it's going to take a long time for healing, because there's individual healing. There's a lot of people on the call that, you know, everybody has their own story leading up to it, and whatever is in their lives or who they are leading up to it is how that pandemic is going to really affect them. Because there's been a bit of like a war almost now. Well, I spent more time here and you didn't do as much, but it's like, no, it affected everybody.
Mhm.
But my philosophy on this is, like, when going to my new job, where I was going to have new respiratory therapists, I think it's more important than ever to just be, I just like marched myself into their office and was like, hey, I'm Sue, and I'm the clinical nurse specialist for the ICU. And I know that I've looked at the whole entire hospital, and the better we work together, the better it's all going to be. What do you say?
Yeah.
And I feel like it helped set some, you know, some tone. And anyway, we've had some really great interactions. Maybe those would have happened anyway. I don't know. But in all things quality, like, or even like coordinator, if you lose the sepsis coordinator, the sepsis program is kind of, you know, all waffling around. You know, you lose your skin champion, and maybe not everyone is getting the same information. You lose somebody that's the champion of the work, whatever the work is. It tends to kind of just poop out because people are tired.
Yeah. I know, and Jonathan just put something in the chat, and Ed did as well, that I think we need to discuss briefly, and probably even more in depth in another podcast. Is we put a Band-Aid over it, and that Band-Aid is trying to hold together a gaping wound, so that time to heal hasn't happened. And you could go, Jonathan Rowe, what is the treatment for staff burnout? Here's the problem. Yoga, pizza, going for a walk. How many damn lectures have you heard about that crap? And it hasn't helped. Oh, I'm going to go for a walk today. I'm going to spend more time with my family. I'm going to do all these things. And there are all these suggestions, but are they actually ways to heal, or are they ways to cope? So coping is different than healing. I'm going to ask you both. Is collaboration a way to heal?
I think so. Coming together for another common goal, whatever that common goal might be, and realizing that one person's not smarter or better than the other person. I'll give it to the nurse. They're at the bedside with the patient way more than I am, because, I come in, check their vent, move on to my next patient. They have 2 patients. I might have 10 vents. I have the entire ICU. I think people need to realize what each other's jobs are, what they do, why they do it, and give each other grace. Again, grace. They don't know that, they called me and they want me to come to their bedside right this second, but they don't know that I'm in another patient's room coding that patient. I went to the bathroom for 5 seconds. You know what I mean? Like, everybody just we need to bring nice back. That's all there is to it. We need to bring nice back.
I agree. Sue, thoughts?
Yeah, and I mean, where did I go? I went to eat somewhere recently, and there was a sign on the door that said "Be nice or get out." And I was like, yeah, if that could just be everywhere, that would be great. But I don't think they would go for that in the hospital setting. However, from the nursing side, and maybe this is something we had talked about during the pandemic that we really couldn't implement because we all had so many new people to train in agencies, or we were short staffed. But I've always wanted, as part of rearing up the new nurse in orientation, to have required time with respiratory therapy built in, required time with physical therapy and occupational built in. I even sent them once with the transporters, because transporters first know where everything is, and they have to know how to get a patient from A to B carrier without dropping them on the floor, and sort of manage all these things. So that's for falls. And I think if that were something we start from the ground up, has the potential then to shift the culture, that the kids on the subway, I've obviously inhaled somewhere, if that makes sense. And that's literally my goal in starting a new place. It's an opportunity. That upfront time spent together while learning, I think, would make a huge difference.
I agree. For me, and Anna and I talk about this, that the host shouldn't be part of the story, but you guys are a big part of my story. Some of the greatest work I ever did was with you two, because we collaborated. I think a lot of times we get so focused on the work and not on the relationship. Relationships matter, because when you like the person you're working with, it's a good day, right? Cathy, have you ever walked into an ICU and looked across and you go, oh crap, it's going to be a crap day? Sue, I'm sure that happened to you. You're like, oh
yeah, when I saw Cathy coming, I thought, crap, Cathy's coming. I'm like, lava beat. Can they just send the brand new agency person that started yesterday? Yes, but I hope that, because I agree. I used to read things all the time that said, people that like go out together outside of work will often work together well. And I think those are great principles. Where I think in healthcare we struggle is we work with a million people. You're in a hospital setting. So finding that, like, even if you do have that, like I had that with Cathy, I mean, I knew I was going to have a good day, or at least a tolerable day that I could make through if Cathy was there all day, but if we don't have something consistent like that in a hospital setting, we're not a little business, small, we're a big business. How do we make that work? So I actually brought out a book. It's called How to Work with People You Can't Stand. Have you guys, anybody on the call read that? I'm not kidding. I mean, because you're right. Like, I love the points that if you like the person, it'll go better. No question. If you know what I mean? I see Cathy and I just like, you know what I mean? You just know. And then you have that group. But the bottom line, in a hospital setting with thousands and thousands of employees, you might have to work with someone you can't stand, but that cannot change your collaboration. That cannot change the standard work that should be done no matter who is on, so that the patient benefits. So people could read the book, How to Work with, there's an article, actually there's an abbreviated article too, How to Work with People You Can't Stand. So that's how Cathy and I developed our best relationship, but no.
Because you guys used to hate each other and now you don't?
And Matt, you are not the host chiming in, because honestly, there would be none of this from I wouldn't be in this position, literally, had you not started that ball and decided I was a stakeholder in the collaboration, literally. Otherwise, I still probably wouldn't know who you were.
We talked about this before the interview. You got to give me a warning before you say stuff like that, okay? Right? Sitting there going,
Here he goes.
Here we go. Oh my goodness. I knew Cathy would enjoy that. Kath, any last thoughts?
You know what? One of the best things working with Sue was, we were in the middle of a pandemic. We're not supposed to be hugging and whatnot. Sue would go, I don't give a shit. And she would give me this big, giant hug when I would see her. And we would then start our dog and pony show. And, sometimes you just need that hug.
We had a designated person and we had our masks on and stuff, but I was like, I don't give a shit. I have to have one person in this place that I can hug, because when she was having a bad day, we could hug. If I was having a bad day, we could hug. And sometimes a lot of the time we were both having a bad day. But I'd get home and my husband would say, how's Cathy today? So that's how you know how deep literally he would ask about Cathy. And then, he knew Cathy, that was just what he knew. And he knew how much I relied on that and how I was so pumped up because I'd never been part of something interdisciplinary like this before. I don't think ever. So I was like, I've been 30 years. What is happening? So that's why it's also really emotional, because it's a huge first for me and I love it.
Are you guys friends today?
You better say yes.
Yep. You read a book about how people that hate each other get along because of me. No, we're not friends.
No, I'll tell you how we know. I mean, we work in separate places and the pandemic is past, but Cathy is VIP in my life and always will be. I'm not, I'm trying to be mushy, but it's just true. I mean, I everybody in the world knows this. I made my best friends out of that. And I think there are other good things that came out of that time that it's almost like, you take that evidence, now let's apply it to post-pandemic and see what happens. And I hope more people become friends because of it too.
That is wonderful. JB, my friend, my dear friend, why don't you take us home? What did we learn today?
Too many things. One, I want to say though, that leaders are made, and what you guys did was a leadership move. As Ed mentioned in the chat, you had to lead by example. No one asked you to go do the dog and pony show. You took it upon yourselves to do that. That is a total leadership move. And congratulations to you both. I hope everyone that listens to this takes a little piece of that with them into their hospital and can achieve the same thing. Next, I always consider like nothing should impact the patient. You are like Secret Service for this patient. You got to take that bullet every time. If you're fighting with, if you're an RN fighting with the RT or you're an RT fighting with the RN, that you may not know it, but it's impacting the patient. There's going to be some kind of piece to that that will flow into that room, and it could be a bad outcome or it could just be a bad patient stay, but it is getting to that patient. So at the end of the day, professionalism needs to win outright, and you have to think about that patient, and you have to check your own emotions, because when you're in that room with the patient doesn't care how bad your day is. They just want to be taken care of. They see their mortality and they don't care about you having a bad day. So, just be professional. That's one. Inclusive environments breed trust. So just working and be partnering with the other professions. And it's not just RT, RN. I mean, there's MDs, hospitalists, intensivists, ED physicians, all the nurses on all the floors, just everyone. You need to take into consideration what they provide to the patient. You have to respect it. And together, that's how you build that collaboration. And finally, what I want to say is, when I became an executive and I took over multiple departments, I gained more respect for every department that I took over, because I put myself in their shoes and I learned what they had to do and what their role was. I think that can roll over here. I think respiratory should take the time to go see what nursing actually does, and nursing should go take the time to see what respiratory does. It sounds like that's what Cathy and Sue did, and it worked well. And I wholeheartedly would emphasize that it's easy just to say, oh, they don't do anything, but until you actually were with them and see what they do, that's how you get a new level of respect for the other professions. And it also helps with the communication breakdown, right? So we all speak healthcare terminology, but it's a little bit differently. It's kind of like an accent, if you will, with respiratory, nursing, physicians. And if you spend enough time with the others, you actually understand their piece to the whole thing. You have more respect for it. And then you're going to get along better. If you get an angry call from an RT or an angry call from an RN, you can just know that they're probably having a terrible day. Don't let it impact you. You can ask them about it later and just build that relationship and say, hey, you know what? Is something going on? Is there anything I can help you with? Start building the relationships, and it's not going to be any easier when we have travelers in registry, because I guarantee you, no one wants to build a relationship if I'm going to be in a different state or a different city in 13 weeks. So try to build that home unit so you don't need travelers in registry, and I think that'll help build out that family environment that we all love at work.
That's a good call, Jonathan. Build your family. These people are your family. Do the best that you can with your family. What I got, RTs, learn about your nurses, learn about your physicians. The person I just was about ready to give a shout out just left. Jeannie Pedanici is my new nursing partner, and I love her to death too, just as much as Sue McDonald, but I wanted to give her a shout out. And then lastly, RNs continue to advocate for RTs. RTs in a rough place too. We can really use you. Anna, I saw your hand up before we go into the next episode.
Yeah, thanks. If I was thinking about this, like someone is going to listen to this recording on their drive home, and they're going to resonate with the things that we've discussed today, and they're going to go like, yeah, that was me. I was short on that phone call, but this is why, maybe I'm defensive on this, or hey, I reacted to that angry phone call negatively, and they're going to be like, oh my gosh, and they don't know where to start. And share this episode, honestly, that easy. It doesn't have to be a formal leadership program. We don't have to shadow the whole day. Start here. Just share this episode and then say, hey, did you have a chance to listen to that 1.5 speed? What did you think? Yes, Cathy and Sue swore, and I'm into it. And anyways, I like if you're thinking of a really easy way to start, like this is how we start. That's like my one plug here.
I think that's a great plug, Anna. This is called RT Sidebar because we're very focused on respiratory, but it's really patient sidebar. Jonathan and I were talking about this past week. What is it? We're all about the patient. So bring your friends, have a conversation. It goes a long way. So thank you, Anna. I appreciate that. For our next episode, I hope you guys are ready. Joy Alexander is a dynamic but yet reluctant leader. She did not want to be put in this position. I remember Cathy asked me that one day too. Do I really want to do this? But she cares about people. She works in a Tampa-based NICU, April 6th, 3:30 Eastern time. It's going to be fantastic. Cathy, Sue, my dear friends, I give you one of these. That's probably the first time I've ever done that. It's kind of weird. But I just want to tell you, I love you guys. And thank you so much for being on RT Sidebar. There we go. Lewis, I like it, man. He does it the right way. Thank you for being on RT Sidebar. Thank you for having a conversation that is a little bit more emotional. So thank you for opening up to us. As always, we always end up RT Sidebar with some shout outs. Our first one is to recognize some barflies and great people. A heartfelt shout out to a great friend, a dear colleague, and brother of ours. Nate, we love you. Please rest in peace, my friend. Anna?
Yeah, a big happy birthday to our fearless leader, Jeff Maglin. And Cathy, do you have any shout outs?
I have a shout out to my brother Mark and Janelle for believing in me, and for Matt and Josh for also believing in me too. Sue, how about you?
Yes, I do. To my wonderful husband who put up with learning all about my best friends on my worst days for all that time. To this fabulous mentor that I had, and then really most of all to you guys, to this respiratory team here, because it changed everything. So thank you.
And a shout out to Kaylee Dayton, who joined us on this podcast. Thank you. Another RN relationship, and a friendly reminder to all of our barflies. This March coming up, we have Kaylee Dayton's webinar on the financial aspect of an awakened walking ICU. Anna?
Yeah, so if you have something worth celebrating, you can give someone a shout out. A great opportunity is maybe that RN or RT who deserves some love in your department. There's a link for that in the show notes, so you can give a shout out and give the gift of your voice to someone else and celebrate them. That's all the time we have for today. We'll see you here again soon.
Thank you.
Vapotherm does not practice medicine or provide medical services or advice. Any clinical recommendations provided herein are solely those of the speaker. Practitioners should refer to the full indications for use and operating instructions of any products referenced before use. The team behind the sidebar are employees of Vapotherm, and our guest is not compensated. All right, awesome. So